Hello and welcome to your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, August 19th, 2020. I am Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Tens of thousands of college students are going to have a very different college experience this fall. Dr. Paul Thomas from Plum Health joins Jer to talk about Michigan State University going remote, the chance that other colleges will follow suit, and the increased spread of coronavirus in the suburbs.
But first, what to know around town, starting as we do with the latest COVID-19 information.
Let's do it to it.
The state of Michigan reported 616 new cases of coronavirus on Wednesday afternoon, bringing the total confirmed cases to more than 94,200. 9 fatalities brought the pandemic death total in the state to 6,349. Michigan has a viral transmission rate of 1.01. We're starting to get on the wrong side of this thing, with more than a half of U.S. states having their RT level below 1. As you know, the city of Detroit was hit very hard early on by the coronavirus pandemic, losing about 1,500 residents to date. To help honor their memory, 900 billboard-sized photos are going up on Belle Isle, and August 31st has been declared Detroit Memorial Day. Mayor Mike Duggan says that this is a time for all of Southeast Michigan to take time to remember those who did not have the funerals and homegoings they deserved. There will be 14 consecutive funeral processions starting at 8:45 a.m. on that day. WRCJ-FM will do the soundtrack for the Memorial Drive. Mourners and residents across the city can tune their radios to 90.9 all day for gospel, classical, and jazz music. At 8:45 on Monday the 31st, Detroiters across the region will be asked to ring bells for 15 minutes to honor our 1,500 victims and signal the beginning of the drive. On the island, white-gloved volunteers from the Belle Isle Conservancy will greet mourners with flowers as they pass. After the processions, dinner will be available for the 900 or so families, and family members will get their loved one's image. There also will be remembrances in all city council districts that night. This all sounds very beautiful, and there will be billboards of people I knew, so personally, I'm glad that they're doing this, and I'll link to more details in the show notes if you are going to participate. There's lots of particulars in parts of the city. Sven, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a personal detour for a quick minute. It's one of the reasons when I get emails or messages on a pretty regular basis now that we're pushing a, quote, coronavirus hoax, unquote, and, quote, propaganda, unquote. I'm going to tell you, man, it takes everything for me to not explode. It's almost completely people who don't want to admit we have a problem and live in denial. You know, it's something where they say, no one will ever listen to the show, or why do we have so many doctors with the establishment on? Which, by the way, is pretty funny if you know Dr. Paul, who'll be on later. But, sir, this is a space for science and facts, and my lived experience just doesn't fit what some meme on Facebook told you.
Yeah, we've talked about it many times, and I still find it incredible that wearing face masks has somehow become politicized and controversial. All of this stuff, QAnon, the denial of science and fact, is rising at the worst possible time. I mean, the more that we talk down like all these public health measures, talking about making sacrifices for the public health, I mean, the longer that we do that, the longer this pandemic is going to drag on. I mean, like, every day, when we hear the new numbers from the state, I just kind of go, ugh, it's like a little piece of me dies, because the numbers are not as bad as during the first wave, at least not yet, which is good, but they're still much higher than they should be. It's like we are riding a smaller wave, but it is still a wave right now. And everybody is about to see the consequences of this, with school going virtual in the fall, college football season being canceled. I mean, Jared, we talk about it all the time offline. Like, I am terrified about what we're going to be able to do when winter comes and it's too cold to go outside and, take walks and ride your bike. Like, we're not going to be able to go anywhere. It's going to be horrifying. I would just also say, as I often do, that all these people who poo-poo science need to take like serious stock of the many ways that science has directly benefited them, right? I mean, from the smartphone that they carry around in their pockets, to the computers that they use to do their jobs, to the cars that they drive. And I mean, even the advances that make it possible for everybody to go to the supermarket to buy fresh food. I mean, none of that stuff would be possible if it weren't for science. So, there you go. And I mean, I'd also add, Jared, I'm no stats guru, but I do know that we've more than doubled our listenership since the pandemic broke. So, all these people who say no one's going to listen to us can go pound sound and drink a bottle of Haterade.
The Milwaukee Junction neighborhood is getting 25 new apartments, 20 of which will be affordable. That's thanks to a new $8 million project at 258 East Milwaukee Street. It's by the Detroit Catholic Pastoral Alliance and MHT Housing, and they're called, creatively, the Milwaukee Junction Apartments. The rental rates will range from under $500 a month to less than $1,000 a month with water included, and that's affordable to a very large range of people, including those making just 40% of the average median income, which is calculated regionally. Units in the 23,000 square foot building will all be the same regardless of the rent tenants pay. There will be a large community room, private parking, and bike storage. The units themselves will have central air, in-unit washers and dryers, and energy-efficient LED lighting. And also, I'd note here, if you're going to do transit in this town, Milwaukee between John R. and Brush is probably among your best locations in the city. It has access to Woodward, and it's basically the most reliable bus route that touches most amenities you'd need on a regular basis. The new development is made possible thanks to low-income housing tax credits through the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, plus support from the Detroit Housing and Revitalization Department and the Detroit Housing Commission. Goes to show you just how many pieces have to fall into place to build affordable housing.
Bollinger Motors, the local electric vehicle startup that isn't named Rivian, has moved its headquarters from Ferndale to neighboring Oak Park. It's part of what the company says is an expansion and hiring blitz as it ramps up toward production. The new location on 11 Mile Road in Oak Park is more than 4 times larger than its previous location, where the company, it says it was, quote, bursting at the seams. Bollinger estimates its team of 40 employees will double by the end of this year. Bollinger is developing 2 battery electric models. The B1 is a rugged 4-door SUV that looks like a Jeep Wrangler, while the B2 is an electric pickup truck. And similar to the Wrangler, both models feature removable doors, windows, windshield, rear lift glass, and roof panels. They're also outfitted with lots of off-road equipment, and they feature AC outlets that let users plug in power tools and other equipment out in the field. Starting price on both vehicles is $125,000, so these are not cheap. The company originally launched in New York before moving to Detroit. It plans to launch low-volume hand-assembled production in the fourth quarter of 2021. Most of the new positions are engineering related. You can email resumes to careers@bollingermotors.com. We will put that email address in the show notes.
Sven, they're obviously in the hyper luxury segment, especially when you're talking about cars that can cost as much as a small house. What do you think of this?
Well, I haven't seen their cars up front, although I've spoken with one of my colleagues at Autoblog who has and toured their I guess now their old location in Ferndale, and he seemed pretty impressed by the craftsmanship shown. These are really boxy looking vehicles. We'll put a photo in the show notes as well. I would just note, though, that I've been in their new building in Oak Park. This is going back like more than 10 years when I was covering business for mlive.com. There was a company called Azure Dynamics. They were, I think if memory serves, they were spun out of university in Canada somewhere. Anyway, they were an electric powertrain developer, and they bought the building for essentially like their new tech center, engineering headquarters, and manufacturing and everything. They were working on converting Ford Transit Connect vans into EVs. Kind of a sad story to this company, as promising as they were at the time. They went bankrupt in 2012 and later were liquidated. And I guess the building was most recently an engineering center for a Chinese EV company. But I remember going there when the company first bought that building, and it was a big building for what was a pretty small company back then with not too many employees yet.
2012 EVs. Wow.
Fashionable Ferndale says it has kicked off work on its citywide mobility plan as part of ongoing efforts to make the inner ring suburb more amenable to walking, biking, and riding transit. The Ferndale Mobility Plan, as it's called, is an update to the 2014 Ferndale Moves Plan. It has seen the city add more than 10 miles of bike lanes, improve dozens of pedestrian street crossings, and make ADA-compliant upgrades to hundreds of sidewalk ramps. The new mobility plan aims to find ways to improve the city's planning and design processes for street projects that encourage non-motorized transportation and address climate change. It all depends on input from residents and users. The city has made available an interactive map where you can leave suggestions. Officials also plan to hold a series of on-street demonstration projects. We'll include all the relevant links in the show notes.
While a few other communities do a good job of encouraging non-motorized ways to get around, Detroit comes to mind with all the bike lanes sprouting up around town. Ferndale, Sven, it always seems to be ahead of the pack around here when it comes to these kind of things.
It's one of the reasons I really like living here, Jer. I mean, making it easier to not use your car adds immeasurably to the quality of life. I wish that more places around here would get that message.
Amazon is hiring in Detroit, this time for 100 positions that pay on average $150,000 a year. They joined 400 people already working downtown at 150 West Jefferson. Amazon will also increase its office space by 25,000 square feet to accommodate the new hires. This is part of a 6-city tech hub expansion initiative where they're hiring 3,500 people nationally. The jobs are in finance, marketing, operations, retail, and with Amazon's AWS cloud computing subsidiary. We'll put a link to Amazon.jobs in the show notes if you want to put in your resume. Amazon says that they now have more than 13,000 employees in Michigan. All right, this last headline story is an interesting bit of historic news. The old Barton pipe organ from the now demolished Hollywood Theater in Detroit will get a new life. But it will be in Rochester, New York, at a new performance center for the Rochester Institute of Technology. The organ has been sitting in storage for decades and is currently at Carlton Smith Pipe Restoration in Indianapolis. It's such an intricate restoration project that the work won't be completed until sometime in 2023 or 2024. This is for one organ. The organ company says that the 4 manual deluxe console will retain its original specifications and its wind action, and the organ loss will be basically identical to the originals in the Hollywood. The Hollywood, according to historicdetroit.org, shout out to Dan Austin, formerly stood on Fort Street and Ferdinand in southwest Detroit, just east of Junction. It was a beautiful single-screen neighborhood theater that opened in 1927 during the boom times and was demolished in 1963. The location sits as a vacant lot to this day, almost 60 years later. When this pandemic is over, I highly suggest going and trying out one of the few remaining pipe organs in town. It's a super cool listening experience, and we need to patronize our places to keep them playing. I know one is at the Senate in that same general area of Southwest Detroit. And, you can email me at dailydetroit@gmail.com if you have any tips on where to check out more.
I know there's another one at the Redford Theater out in Northwest Detroit as well. That's on Lazar.
Joining me as he does, Dr. Paul Thomas from Plum Health Direct Primary Care. There is a ton to talk about today. As it always seems to happen, the second we hit post on a podcast, no matter when we finish the show, news breaks, and yesterday word came mere minutes after we uploaded that MSU, Michigan State University, has moved to remote instruction. A lot of students and parents are disappointed. Doc, I know you're an MSU alum. What is going on?
Yeah, I think this is probably the third college domino to fall to COVID-19. So I think what really started was, let's talk about Notre Dame for a minute. They had tested every single student, like 12,000 students, before they set foot on campus. They had a 99.7% negative rate for COVID-19 testing.
Whew.
And then once everybody got on campus, they all gathered for off-campus parties, and suddenly they had 147 positive cases within 8 days. And then they called it all off. No more in-person classes, at least until September 2nd. And then the second domino was, I think it was University of North Carolina, and they had a similar episode where they had people partying off campus, and they had a huge spike in numbers. And I think MSU saw the writing on the wall and wanted to do their best to protect their students. And the best way to do that is to have everybody stay home for the time being and not gather on campus, because it's only a matter of time before students start wandering north of Michigan Avenue in East Lansing and getting into the fraternity parties and house parties off campus and mixing with people who are not students and picking up the virus that way.
I mean, was this inevitable?
Yes, it's inevitable. We're in a pandemic. I think we're going to see more and more of this as we try to quote unquote return to normal. And it's just not going to happen as we would like it to happen. I think we're going to see outbreaks in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, daycare centers, kindergarten, trade schools, colleges, etc. And there's no good answer because we still don't have a coordinated federal response to the coronavirus.
Well, and that raises a lot of questions. I know that Wayne State was early on in kind of making things go remote and saying that they were going to go remote. But as of this recording, it looks like University of Michigan has not pulled this trigger. Reports are saying that staff do not want face-to-face instruction, but football players do want to play. I mean, do you think University of Michigan is next? And do you think, as far as schools in general, we're kind of in this, kind of false hope phase?
It's difficult to know whether or not Michigan is going to go forward. But if you look at other major universities in the area, you're looking at Michigan State, and then Notre Dame, as I cited earlier, you would think that they're going to have to go remote, because I think it's just too much of a liability. If you get 30, 50, 500 undergrads in some of these huge lecture halls, and then you start doing in-person instruction under those circumstances, and then perhaps you have an immunocompromised professor who dies under that circumstance, I think the university would likely be sued for something like that. And I think it's a huge liability that they cannot justify. So why not just leverage your online resources and go remote and protect the people on campus and your professors and everybody from your janitorial staff on up through, your administration of the university. You're trying to protect all of those people, everybody in between. It just makes too much sense to stay at home, even though you're probably going to take a hit from tuition or room and board type of stuff, or you might have students deferring or taking a year off. But, let's face it, 2020's basically a wash at this point, and some things that we love are going to take a hold for another year.
I think it's really important to be able to hold these two things in place, where there are people who are really looking forward to all of this, who are just not going to have the same experience that they were looking forward to. You've got parents disappointed that their kids aren't going to have the same experience they did. But I think that's the real life situation of what we're dealing with here.
Right. Yeah. It'd be terrible to have to wait a year to start college, but you could look at it the opposite side. You could go work a minimum wage job, or you could maybe get some experience shadowing or interning at a company, or trying your best to do some other offline learning or traveling the country and getting experience that way. And then maybe you'd come back to college in 2021 being super motivated to not ever be in that position ever again. It's kind of tough to look at it that way, but in reality, that's what it's going to be like. And then, as a Michigan State student, there was a lot of fun to be had around Welcome Week your freshman year, and getting to meet lifelong friends through that process of integrating to a campus culture and getting to know the people in the community. But, they're going to have hopefully 3.5 years, maybe 3 years to, enrich themselves that way in the culture of the campus and get to make those lifelong friends. I don't think it's going to be a tremendous setback in that they're never going to have a normal life. It's just going to be a blip on the radar when they look back to this time, maybe 3 or 5 years from now.
Well, with that, I want to pivot to things that are even more local. I noticed in the show yesterday, we mentioned it, and today I go back and look at the numbers. We're starting to see some concerning case numbers per 100,000 people in Macomb and Oakland counties. Do you have any insight into that?
I do. I think the city of Detroit has done a really good job of flattening the curve, really clamping down on restaurants and making sure that everybody's following the 6-foot guidelines, wearing masks in public, and doing a really good job communicating those steps to protect people in the community. And I feel like Oakland County and Macomb County have slipped up a little bit. I don't know if it's the people or the government or a little bit of both, but we've seen some large-scale events that have attracted people that may be putting people at undue risk for COVID-19. And the things I'm going to point to are like Jobby Nooner. There was also a float down in Port Huron. So those are your Macomb County type events. There's also a boat cruise where people gathered. And then in Oakland County, people still went out and hung out for the Woodward Dream Cruise and are gathering in that way. So I think we really have to look at these large-scale gatherings as potential areas of greater community spread. And these are things that we need to step in on and say, like, this is not the right thing to do. You're endangering people directly and indirectly. And these are the ways that we're going to, worsen our outcomes as a community around COVID-19.
Well, and looking at those pictures from those events, and it was clear that there just wasn't a lot of mask wearing going on either.
Right. Not a lot of mask wearing, not a lot of social distancing. People gathered for 4th of July and had barbecues and things like that. And you might see a little spike from that, or, people are traveling, taking long weekends, maybe going into some crowded bars and things like that, where people aren't observing the Michigan laws around social distancing and mask wearing, and bar owners in particular. And those are going to be the hot spots. So if you find yourself walking up to a crowded bar that you want to go to, it's not a good idea to go in. Go grab a drink on a patio somewhere. There's lots of good places that have been observing rules. Like locally, there's EMA that has a patio. They've been doing a great job keeping people spread out. There's like the Motor City Wine Bar. They've been doing a nice job. I walked by the old Miami the other night, and also like Honest John's. They have a really nice patio spread out where people are totally distanced from each other. It's individual pods. So, and there's options to get out there and socialize. You just got to avoid those crowded bars or crowded house parties or crowded backyard parties where this virus is going to spread easily.
Well, Dr. Paul Thomas, Direct Primary Care, Plum Health. So good to talk to you again, sir, even if not the greatest circumstances.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and stay safe out there, everybody. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and do your best to combat this virus.
All right, since we're wrapped up with Dr. Paul here, Sven, I know you have some post-interview thoughts.
Yeah, I was talking with my peanut gallery friends, as I call them today, about how, Michigan State's announcement might put the pressure on the University of Michigan and other big schools around here to follow suit. It's one thing for universities to say, well, in all of our buildings, we're going to have like ramped up cleaning protocols and we'll be rigidly enforcing social distancing and all that stuff and air circulation. But I mean, come on, let's be frank. Like college is all about living out, kind of the twilight days of your youth and being irresponsible, frankly, right? It's like going to parties, playing beer pong, making out with strangers, social gatherings, all that good stuff, which unfortunately in this day and age is a recipe for disaster, right? And one of my friends in this peanut gallery actually works for the U of M, and he pointed me to a Twitter thread, which I will link to in the show notes. I got a lot of things to link to in today's show notes, but I'll link to it. The upshot of it is that colleges have invested nowadays much more heavily in experiences as a way to draw students than in actual education. All this at a time when they face declining public funding. And the thread is basically all about why it's not so simple for colleges to just say, okay, forget it. We're closing our classrooms for in-person instruction this fall and going all virtual. It's a slightly dispiriting read, but it's really interesting.
I'm looking forward to checking that out. I wanted to take a quick moment and talk with you, our listeners. And Sven, I just wanted to remind you all that if you hadn't noticed, we have been posting the show a little bit later in the day. And we've kind of done a drive time switch. We were really trying to do the morning. And now we're back mostly to the afternoons. I mean, we're trying to get out as soon as we can.
We missed our alarm.
Yeah, we missed our alarm. We slept through. But in reality, I mean, this is a COVID-19 related switch. And I felt like we should tell listeners about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I got a real good, I think, foreshadowing today of what's in store for me. I just had lots of interruptions going on this morning from my kids and family members and people texting me, and it was hard to focus and do my work. And we talked about it on yesterday's show. That's kind of going to be what it's like for the upcoming school year, those of us who have kids in school, and it's just going to make getting the show out in the mornings really tough. So it is what it is. We definitely like having the show out in the mornings, as I'm sure you've gotten accustomed, but for the time being anyway, it's just kind of infeasible operationally.
Well, and as the producer of this thing, I feel like it's important, and I really want to talk to my fellow managers out there as well. It's really important to give people grace and space in this time. I talked about this a little bit on an Instagram live a couple days ago, but we need to do things to make sure that our people are taken care of, because this is a crisis situation and it's ongoing. Like, none of us thought when this first happened, like in the spring, Sven. I mean, remember when you and I were like, oh yeah, 6 weeks, couple months, we'll be back together. It'll be great. I'm looking forward to a patio in like June, right? And then now it's August and September. And if we're being honest, when I talk to people on background, some people are saying, oh, it'll be a 2-week closure. We can't prepare as an organization for a 2-week situation. I feel like, if we're being honest, this is the rest of 2020.
Oh, I have no doubts. I don't even want to wager a guess as to how long this goes, partly because I think I'm too scared to, and it's too depressing to confront. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But we love our listeners, and we hope that you hang with us through the changes.
I would be remiss if I didn't, before we said goodbye, remind you to remember to become a member at patreon.com/dailydetroit. And if you have feedback for the show, thoughts, we have a voicemail line, 313-789-3211. That's 313-789-3211. Give it a jingle. We'd be glad to hear from you. With that, I am Jer Stays, and that is it for your Daily Detroit.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this thing together.
Let me try that from the top. I've got a squirrel chattering in my ear. I'm serious. He's here just like,